I think this is from the 1951 master plan. And then you can see here again, this is what they call the Yellow Book. This was actually the first federal plan for where interstates were going to go. And this is when they really began looking at how we're going to get transcontinental routes signed through our cities. And that's the reason why Interstate 75 kind of turns a corner at that interchange. So what we call 375 is really just one portion of a much larger north-south freeway called the Chrysler Freeway. North of the interchange with Interstate 75, that Interstate 75 designation continues on, and that facility, not only did it destroy the neighborhoods, to the south, right adjacent to the central business district, it cut a swath of destruction all the way up for, 5, 6, 7 miles along what we call the Hastings Street corridor. And so unfortunately, north of the 375 interchange, we're not talking about that, but we've got to start somewhere.
Why is there a problem here? Is there a consensus? What is the nature of the removal you want to do? That was like green belt versus street grid versus cap. What are you addressing in terms of safety, environmental, economic development, health? Equity is not on this list because it's its own chapter 7. There needs to be some sort of consensus with why you're doing what you're doing. Like any process that involves federal highways, we're going to say, there is going to be a process. A toolkit in order to address this process kind of doesn't exist now. You're pulling pieces from all over the place, and then you also have some pieces that don't exist where you're, even though maybe you're the 20th city to remove a freeway, you're still trying to figure out, well, how do I work through this step? There will be, especially since there's federal funding, requirements to go through, cost estimation, there's a political process, and policy analysis. Apologize for spelling that incorrectly. That off the screen as quickly as possible. Third logical step, especially since CNU is involved, is to do a proper visioning and engagement involving community and stakeholders. Some of the issues that were raised to humanizations, that's just when a citizen walks into a participatory process. They didn't participate very much last time, and they don't have high expectations for this time. The oral history, which often when it comes to highway removal is a history, at best of dictatorship of the DOT and at worst of racist exploitation. And the importance of building coalitions with existing institutions. Again, just examples, not everything will be in the chapter. Next step, design practices. This involves both the land use and the street rights of way or park right of way or whatever you're building, but to use human scale design practices and hopefully the design practices that CNU has created are supported here. This is something that's maybe running in the background at the DOT. This is one of the hardest things to deal with besides just the manuals, are the models. It's a word that you probably need to know, especially in the context of 375. Modeling in transportation planning is used to describe a computer program that predicts the amount of traffic that there will be on a given day, on a given hour, on a given turn, on a given ramp. This science is not a well-developed science, even though very profound decisions are made based on the science. There have been people who have been working to reform modeling. It's really hard to do, but some of the first steps are to stop focusing it on vehicles, start focusing on the number of people involved, start reflecting values, the idea that we will always provide, people in the parking business talk about why are we always providing sufficient parking, but not always providing sufficient housing. And the same thing is true here. There seems to be an ethic to always provide sufficient capacity so that traffic moves at high speed in the rush hour. Modeling is at the core of this, and the opposite of this is making decisions about what type of community you want, and and understanding that all the projections of terminal congestion, first of all, they're weak science, and secondly, you might choose to tolerate some congestion in exchange for a livable community.
Where this land that used to be the freeway begins to see redevelopment. Now, yeah, there could be, I think that the DOT has always got a park space for whatever, including like under freeways. I don't know if y'all have seen that, but it's crazy. They're just like, oh, we're gonna make your freeway better by putting a park under it. And it's just not a solution. But reusing the land is themselves and for the community to benefit, keeping that value, local building generational wealth in the community. And there's also an opportunity for providing for business incubation opportunities, giving the community the opportunity to build business, to build wealth, and to keep that wealth in the community. And so how does that tie to advancing climate equity? Well, there aren't rules yet for how that land is used. So let's think about those rules. What if we had that land transferred not to the city to settle, right, but to a community land trust that's putting that money back in the hands of the people before settle, right? You can't do that property by property, but perhaps we can find a way that can be handled by a land trust, by a land bank, by some other authority that can then ensure that the right type of development occurs and that money stays in the community. So I just wanted to throw that out there so we're thinking about that.
So I want to talk about an initiative that we've been working on for the past couple of years called the Climate Receiver Places Project. And so before I talk about the project, I want to go over what exactly a climate receiver replaces. And we're going to break this down. So we're going to cover what a place is, and Larry had started talking about that. Yeah, what is a place? So these are two kinds of developments. You have a suburban development, which we refer to as the problem, and we have an urban development, which we call the solution. Actually, sorry, do you want to go back 2 slides, Matt? Thanks.
I'll just wait for you to say next.
Okay, sure. Okay, so I know a lot of people in this room know why development is good versus bad, but just to give an overview. As you can see in this pattern, it's very sprawly, it's very dispersed, and it's car-centric. So for people to move around a space like this, they would require a car. And that, basically that kind of development is unsustainable, it's expensive, it's bad for the environment, and it's not healthy. Versus the solution method, which is an urban development, which is compact, it's people-centric, it's walkable, it's diverse with mixed uses, it's more affordable and equitable in nature from its diversity of uses and people and whatnot. Next. So just to put this in a little bit of perspective, so this is what a suburban development would have, which is tons of cars. And the ratio of cars to people is 40 cars versus 40 people. And then you compare that to how many people can fit in a bus and how much more compact that is. And even comparing that to cyclists, that just takes up a lot less space. And to show an example of what a new urbanist community, this is the first new urbanist community that was built, Seaside in Florida by DPZ, where Matt is a partner at. Great compact development with great building principles, walkability, and on that same tract of land, here's an example of what a suburban development would look like. And this is much more desirable, healthy, whatnot. Okay, so going back to what is a climate receiver place? So analyzing good principles of building with the Climate Risk Places project, we have been identifying places across the entire country that has a good framework in place, good bones that is compact and is able to build upon.
In doing processes like these to build partnerships and with others, inform people about what is happening with this project, reel them into the conversation, update them.
So just for clarity, I am not a transit girl. So a lot of this I'm learning right now, but just I'm from Detroit, so my family is very rooted in that area. And I will say for people who don't have experience with I-375, it is probably one of the most sensitive challenges that Detroit has been facing lately. And so I know that there are tons of people in isolation kind of working through the plans of what I-375 initiatives will look like. But there are people who have been doing the work, have been archiving. There's a Black Reparations Task Force that is meeting now. They have like a 9-member committee, and they're stewarding this process in some ways. And so even FinCo, who has an entire presentation for you. And so like Gary said, your ideas are valued, but there are organizations that are doing this work, and just to really make sure you're tapping into those resources. I know students from Wayne State, there's an organization called the Black Bottom Archives, and so even students and some of the future planners are really involved in this process. So, you know, I hope it really gets the attention that it deserves. I hope, you know, like justice is served in a way, and we can really see this community flourish, because it's really the connection, right? This is what we do. We're urban planners, and we connect people to places. So, looking forward to seeing how, you know, everything turns out.
It's 445 Brady Street, which is near Rivard, and I remember running the wonderful rich black soils of Hastings Streets with my father. He was a beef owner with the Standard Beef Company, and my mom, she was a nurse, and I believe she worked at the hospital I was born in that was in Black Bottom called Trinity, which no longer exists. But on those streets of Hastings, I can remember up until the age of 5, being in that environment with my parents, and knowing everybody on Hastings. I don't care which merchant was there, we were able to interact with them, live with them, and be cared by them. My parents dropped me off at the barber shop while my dad went to work. He could come back, and I was a safe child there. So I have so many memories from age 1 to 5. Then after that, we were forced out, like I heard that mentioned earlier, because of what they were doing with Hastings Street. And we moved maybe Du Bois, St. Aubin. Those are still in the areas of Black Bottom. And then we were forced out of there because I went to Campbell Elementary School, which was on St. Aubin. And they wanted to redevelop that school, so they pushed us out of there. My parents were buying that home as well. My parents tried to buy homes 4 times. Each time we were forced out. And as a child, by age 7, I started questioning this. Why can't we just stay in one house? You know, and they tried to make me understand what was being done by the government. But I couldn't understand it, and it affected me and my siblings a lot, moving from place to place. So I remember this one street we were on, Du Bois. The school that we were forced out on St. Aubin became a school on Du Bois. Matter of fact, the front door of that house that we were trying to buy was the front door of the new Campbell Elementary School. So it was just like over and over again, we were just forced out everywhere we moved to. And it became a problem even within our household, because there was always that conversation there, and it made everybody, wow, like we got through it. And that's why in my life, I'm just like a dandelion. I'm so resilient because I'm gonna get through whatever comes my way. I'm 75 now, and I guess I'll still be pushing through all the other things that come forward to me, but I just want this future to be better for my great-grandchildren and their children, and hopefully we'll get to that point. So this is coming from the heart of a dandelion.
Some of you guys may have seen some of these, some of them are different, but kind of reorganize them a little bit to be a little bit more specific to what we're talking about, particularly here with freeways. This is a slide that local, I forget what city anymore, I forget where it was from, but there's a blog called Detroitology, it's called. Collects a lot of cool maps. This one's actually a derivative map from Data City, Detroit, where you sort of see the freeway that's coming northeast, I guess, through Detroit to 75, stretches all the way from the top of Michigan all the way down to Miami. But this segment goes right through this part of the city, and more able to intuit what those red dots mean already. The red dots are where the black folks live, and the black and blue dots are where everyone else lives, right? I think the thing that I want to get through with these couple of slides that I prepared for you is that it wasn't just Detroit, and it was more often than not a premeditated decision to run the freeways in which there's land, which alludes to and gets to all the other equity pieces that we're talking about. And so from my perspective, you really can't talk about a highway remediation program if you're not talking about remediating the entire thing, right? Talking about remediating the fabric, which benefits everybody in the public realm, public space. But there were individuals, demographic group, and people that were harmed in that process. We'll go to Dr. King's quote here. The instance of highways being used as a mechanism to, in this particular case, take away, push out, force out African Americans from their property is just another instance of this happening in the past, right? It's the same playbook, different play, right? And that's what I want to get for across you guys. I love this quote from Dr. King, probably one of his lesser known quotes. Primarily because it kind of leads to some of his radical ways of thinking. This is a quote taken from his campaign down in the South, for his poor people's campaign. And in the context of land in America, and it's something that Dr. King understood really, really well, that it is the land who has the ability to own that land, manipulate that land, capitalize on that land. That is the part of the power of land in America. And what he's essentially talking about from his modern context in the 1960s is that there's a tradition of divvying up land, giving land, taking away land, but also from an African American standpoint, having a relationship with land where those individuals do not have the same opportunities to own, manipulate, and benefit from that land, right? And so I want to walk through just very quickly. These are actually some slides that I took from a presentation I gave at CNU earlier, which are inevitably slides that I've taken from my lecture classes. But let's look at the lineage of the relationship between African Americans and land in America, right? We have to start with slavery, right? That relationship of being on the land, having that intimate knowledge of the land, how to work it, how to yield benefits from it, yet yourself not being able to take advantage of those benefits, right? And this is where we have to begin in terms of talking about African Americans existing on the land, and again, not being able to have those full-fledged benefits of being able to benefit from the land. Within the context of slavery, there was this system called slave codes. In many cases, they were adapted into the colonial codes of many of those early colonies, right? And this probably the most egregious example from the Virginia House of Burgess, their slave code. All slave codes have these sort of elements that sort of link them together. The ones that I highlighted in red are ones that relate to the physical space, to the built environment, right? I put an excerpt there from the Virginia Slave Code of 1705. You start to see some instances where there's permissions to move, right, being surveilled, right? Again, it seems like it's not connected, but again, there's a perspective that we've built in the context of this country as it relates to non-white individuals, right? How we look at people on the land, who has the ability to move freely on the land, right? Again, these are important because they infer whether premeditated or just by mistake in our current context. Let's fast forward a little bit to the 19th century, where on paper, at least, African Americans get their freedom. This is an image taken from Harper's Weekly of General Sherman, who is essentially negotiating the terms of the Confederacy's surrender, but also trying to negotiate what do we do with this new demographic of Americans, the freedmen as they were called, right? During these negotiations, and I love this story, and I encourage you all to do a little bit of research on this moment of our history and Reconstruction, but during these negotiations, General Shaw, who was on task from President Lincoln, is talking with the leaders of the now African American community, mainly Baptist and Methodist ministers, who understand their demographic to a T. They understand that these African ethnic people, now Americans, they don't have a lot. They don't have any money. They don't have anything of value within the context of America. They're ignorant to a lot of things. Many of them can't read or write, and if they could, they wouldn't tell you, right? But what they understood is that these people know the land. They've been working it for 300 years. I know how to yield things from the land. I can grow things from the land. So what they asked from General Sherman, and essentially from President Lincoln, is give us land. Give us land and we can work so that we can have the opportunity to build something for ourselves. And that is where Special Field Order 15 comes from, or colloquially as it's called, 40 acres and a mule, which was essentially confiscated land from the Confederacy. You can see a diagram of that here. Very valuable land stretching from Charleston, South Carolina, all the way down to Jacksonville. All land that would have been confiscated from the Confederacy and then divvied up into 40-acre lots and given to roughly 40,000 freed men. In addition to that, they were also going to be loaned the tools necessary to have the opportunity to generate wealth for themselves on that land, right? Again, if you know the story, you know that actually didn't happen. That land was given back to the previous planters that owned it. And then another instance of, again, African Americans in their relationship with land not being fulfilled, right, or not having that freedom in the American context to really harness that opportunity. As we move into the 19th century, now these refugees in their own land, they either have the opportunity through these black codes to either enter into agreement with their former enslavers, now as sharecroppers with unfair land contracts, or become frontiersmen. And that's what many of them did. First, migration, African American migration out of the South, we call the Exodus movement, where you have about 40,000 of them moving out of the South and starting their own towns, literally starting their own towns and townships, particularly in the states of Oklahoma, Kansas, and also the Colorado territory, which wasn't a state back then, neither was Oklahoma. But this was a place of respite where out of the segregated South, these African Americans could find that peace and that opportunity to have that land, right? That is protected and promised to them, the opportunity to them as Americans, which is what they are now. And they started a lot of towns, but again, you see this instance of, for a variety of reasons, mainly because African Americans were trying to express their freedom to vote, protesting unfair labor practices. Because of those reasons, many of those that first wave of black towns, black home ownership, black business, black entrepreneurship, does not exist anymore, right? And so you get, you have another wave of land legally owned by this demographic of people being taken away unjustly in this particular context. Richard Washington calls it de facto segregation, de facto racism, right? Nonetheless, let's keep going forward, right? Kind of hearkening to the spirit that Mama Ray was talking about, like perseverance, right? That is embedded in this particular demographic. Having those first waves of African American communities destroyed, we move further, move deeper, we find another place where that respite can happen. This is a diagram of Tulsa or Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is an area of about 40 acres north of downtown Tulsa that was codified into law to be only for, quote, the Negroes, right? So this was the only place that if you were African American, you could live in Tulsa. It was almost a precursor to zoning, where this is where the African Americans could live out of necessity. It was put into law, right? Mr. Otto G. Gurley buys this land, a very successful individual. He was an appointee of 2 presidents. Very fascinating story. Encourage you to look it up. But Tulsa, Oklahoma, like so many other black-founded neighborhoods, towns in this era, become really, really well-knit communities out of necessity, right? Now, I think I have this quote here, yeah. And I think that's the point to sort of really remember here, is that a lot of these black towns were founded out of necessity because they couldn't live in the context of their fellow white Americans, right? And so a lot of these towns were founded because they needed to be. Many of these second wave communities, which alludes to the grandeur of these places, were not only for African Americans, but they were built from the wealth of African Americans, right? Major banks weren't lending to development projects in Greenwood. Insurance companies would insure, but if you know the story of Greenwood, none of those insurance policies were fulfilled after the property was destroyed, right? And so yet again, you have another wave of African American towns where they had the opportunity to stabilize, to build that wealth through land taken away. And again, Tulsa is just one instance of many, right? And so that, second great migration, should be familiar with that. I want to move forward. That brings us to the things that I think we talked about in the modern context, this idea of zoning and highway removal and all that stuff, which really dates back to zoning. And so a lot of those instances that I just talked about of black towns and neighborhoods being destroyed really were de facto ways of removing land unconstitutionally from people. You had a lot of angry mobs coming in, not hyperbole, lynching people in the streets, in the public square, destroying property. In fact, Greenwood had a bomb dropped on it from a sharecropping plane, right? So these are just people, private citizens, taking in their own hands to remove the legally owned property from fellow Americans. Now we move into this sort of de jure way of getting to the same end, right? Meaning we're going to pass legislation that does essentially the same thing. Many people in my profession, those in my profession, like to herald the 1916 New York City landmark zoning code as the first, sort of citywide zoning ordinance. And I think from a certain perspective, that's true. However, there were a lot of different zoning instances that were passed even before that. There's a couple of them. I think there's another one that I forgot to add here. But again, here, these inaugural zoning laws, as we know zoning to be, 4 out of the 6 of the ones that I'm showing here have to do with uses, what I like to call uses or users, right? We're not zoning for the form or the image of the city. We're zoning on who can use the city and what those individuals can do with that, right? As a way to regulate who can access the city, right? As only 2 of these are actually focusing on the built environment from a form capacity standard. The rest of these are talking about uses and users, and usually the uses are just a way to exclude the users. As is the case in San Francisco, if you know anything about that, the laundries were mostly run by Chinese people. They were trying to keep Chinese people out of certain areas of the city, right? And so using that as a metric, the one I like to point out is what I like to call one of the first citywide zoning metrics as we now know zoning to be, which is the Baltimore Code, which is the first instance where a citywide mandate was passed by City Council to prohibit African Americans from living on certain parcels. And you can see some of the language that's being used to describe the reasons for why we need zoning. Right? I mean, zoning does not exist the way we know it now, right? They're sort of mulling through zoning at this particular point. It's the 10s and the 20s, right? Again, zoning does not exist. And so essentially these are the foundations of our American zoning system as it operates in the context that we live in today. As we begin to inch toward formalizing zoning in America, there's a decision called the Buchanan decision, which came out of Louisville, which essentially the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot prohibit an individual from legally disposing of their property the way they see fit. In this particular case, a white man was trying to sell his property to an African American man, but Louisville had a law on the books that said a black person could not live in the same block as a white person. When all it was the Supreme Court ruled that to be the correct case, right? And so this white individual was able to dispose of his property to this black man. But there's a loophole in there, and I think this quote from one of the 1920s law professors who was very prevalent at the time sort of describes that loophole to a T, which leads us to today, right? Preventing the coming of a colored person into a district is more powerful reason for the spread of zoning than the creation of the single-family district. He's talking about the Buchanan decision. It made it impossible to find an appropriate legal formula for zoning, but if we can masquerade zoning as an economic measure, it essentially accomplishes the same thing. Right? Here is the cloak that, whether we know it or not, even in a modern sense, begins to hide the reason for zoning the way we do in America today. Here's just a couple of excerpts from the 1920 Atlanta zoning code, which wasn't codified in the way that it was originally written, but certain things were removed, certain things were not removed when it was actually codified that we use as a chassis for how we zone our cities today. The R1 district was essentially invented as the white district. Anything other than an R2 district was the colored district, right? Now, we don't call them that today, right? But that's essentially where that comes from. Right? This plan as it was laid out was essentially deemed unconstitutional. And so what they did was just remove the mention of race. All the other metrics, economic measures, the metrics that were put in place will remain. And so yes, we're not saying we can't prohibit African Americans from living in this neighborhood or white Americans from mingling, but the economic measures that are embedded within that essentially get to the same thing. And so these last couple of slides that I want to show you are essentially why this element of zoning is so important. Because it essentially is the chassis for all these other things that we talked about within the planning and urban design measure. Redlining, there's a linkage to zoning. The routing of highways, there's a linkage to zoning, right? So here is a map of that Atlanta zoning code, and I'll show you some other instances. Some of you guys may have seen this before, but here's the map of Atlanta and its zoning code, right? The areas that are in purple are the R1 white districts, and the areas that are R2 are the colored districts, these blue turquoise districts, right? This is about 1922-ish. This is the HLLC map, or colloquially called the redlining map. Okay? This is about 7 years later, right? But what happens when you take the colored districts, the R2 districts, and you overlay them over the red line districts, right? You almost get a 1-to-1 ratio of where they fall within the red line areas, right? If you know anything about the red line maps, the HLC maps, the residential security maps, these are the areas of the city where it is deemed, not in practical matters, but it is deemed to be evaluated to be unvaluable land. Essentially meaning that we're not going to give you loans there, we're not going to insure anything there, you are on your own, right? Let's fast forward a couple of, about a decade or so later when, probably 2 decades in Atlanta, where the freeways are starting to get crowded, right? So if we overlay where the freeways are, again, you start to see how this gets routed, right? If you know anything about this area of Atlanta, just to kind of give a story that flies in the face of, this being unvaluable land, this is where Clark Atlanta is, this is where Morehouse College is, this is where, a lot of black homeowners live, right? So to call it unvaluable land is really disingenuous, right? Valuable land in the eyes of who? And again, this is an instance that happens all across the country. These are some slides from our students. Again, same pattern here. This is the HLC map that they abstracted. These hatched areas are African American towns that just so happen to coincide with the red and yellow region areas, the most devalued land in the city, and then we run a freeway through, right? This is Pittsburgh. This is Nashville. These 2 blocks that I'm showing here are 2 historically black colleges. This is Tennessee State University, this is Fisk. They happen to be in the red line area of the city. Originally, they were connected by Jefferson Avenue, which led directly to downtown and connected these 2 very, very valuable universities. Yet, when we look at the way we're routing our highways, they do so in a way that A, disconnects Tennessee State from Fisk, right? But also separates and segregates the black area from downtown, right? This is Nashville, Tennessee. And there's many others. Let's bring it home, and then we'll open it up for, I think, a broader discussion here. Let's bring it home to Detroit. Same pattern happens, right? Paradise Valley, Black Bottoms, up to 75, what would become the 75 corridor. This is where my folks migrated to from Alabama. If you're familiar with Detroit, you know what's going on in this area here. This is where a lot of the Latino community lives, a lot of industry, the west side of the state, right? And then again, you see what's happening here. These are, I would love to actually get those maps of the different versions of the freeways here, but these are the actual freeways that were actually built. And you can see they run right through, the areas you imagine. Before and after images of 75 north of here. I have 2 more slides I'm going to show here. What this shows, again, why this is important, is the system of ebbs and flows. As there's moments of progression from the African American community trying to, what I call, realize their opportunity for upward economic mobility through land ownership, there have been reactions to that throughout history, ever since emancipation, right? And so here we are at the end of this spectrum here, and we have opportunities to do something different, to actually remediate and go beyond just thoughts and plaques, right? You have to ask yourself the question, right? I actually want to end on this slide because my colleague Mitch Silver was also a senior board member. I heard him say this stat a couple of days ago when he was doing his online chat, and I think he got this from the gentleman named Joe Nicosi, but essentially, if we talk about the value that was lost through those instances, before and after emancipation, so before is estimated that about $20 trillion of free labor was given to American landowners to work the land specifically. That's during the institution of slavery. After that, there's several $billion of African American property, landowners, businesses, all destroyed and confiscated either unconstitutionally or essentially to compensate for those individual moments that happened in succession. across the sort of spectrum of time. And so again, our thoughts and plaques enough to really make remediation for that. And then the last thing I'll add, and I'll pass the mic to Adam, is that it's really insightful and encouraging to see that communities across the country are actually having legitimate conversations about what that reparative program could be, right? Which we can get to these things, we can critique, what NDOT is doing to a blue in the face, right? From an urbanism standpoint. But is it truly remediation if we're just remediating one aspect of what was taken away and not the totality of what was taken? And with that, I will leave this. Thank you.
What Mother Nature and the Earth has given us. And I do a program called Urban Walk and Talk / Chat and Shoot, where we walk in Milton State Park, and I discover and show people what edibles, medicinals, and survival plants are that you can actually find in your backyard. And I mean, there's at least 10 of them in everybody's backyard if you haven't mowed them all down. So stop mowing down all these wonderful things, especially the dandelion. And so after we take the walk, it's a 40-minute walking initiative, as a matter of fact. And afterwards, we just stay curious. The first class is always about the dandelion, of course. And we take that back to the table and talk about the dandelion, what it does. And I always serve a dish of something made from the dandelion. Because I eat dandelions every day. I had dandelion coffee for breakfast this morning, like I always do. And then I might have dandelions in my soup or my salad or something like that. But the dandelion does so much for the body. It helps the immune system. It helps overall health. And it's something that we need to really stop killing off in this land. Eat those dandelions, pick them up wherever you can, and just use them and you have better health. So in our Urban Walk and Talk, that's what we do. We have a lot of fun, and we talk about other herbs, not just the dandelion, but at least 100 or more particular herbs and spices and stuff like that.
I think you're on Facebook and Instagram, right?
Pardon?
You're on Facebook and Instagram?
My mentees have me there, yeah.
On Instagram.
And when is the next walk?
Well, we were supposed to have one today.
Oh.
That's another
But
story.
the Conservancy had a run or something going on.
Oh,
down
yeah,
there,
yeah.
so,
Harvest Fest.
they pushed us off the program. That would really been nice. But we're gonna start different farmer markets. You can find me on that Alta Farmers Market or somebody's forest or somebody's backyard, discovering these plants. So if you have any questions about certain plants, I can probably tell you.
I've heard so much about you from Monica.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Monica. Next year we'll be learning how to eat the trees. That's one of my programs coming up. Eat the trees, y'all. In case of emergency, you never know what this government's gonna do to us. We might not be able to go off our blocks or 2 blocks or so, but you'll be able to go in that backyard and find something to drink.
So before we break, not interrupt, but before we break, do you have any thoughts or ideas?
The professor at Wayne State, I believe, you are?
No, I'm
No, over here.
Marcus.
Oh, no. I actually teach at the University of Maryland.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Florida universities need you
Yeah.
bad.
Appreciate that.
To move forward, which is to consider a different way that the land that's created can be used and can benefit the community. I think that is something that can very easily be done. We're talking about some different financing mechanisms for investment in sustainable initiatives. That's like one world, but let's look at how that land can be reused in such a way that the outcomes are directed towards things that benefit the community, and that the value that's created is captured and distributed to the community, especially those that are forced out. I think that is totally doable, and we should be talking about the reuse of lands from highway removals in that manner. So I
375 right now, it sees about an AADT of like 7,000 to 8,000 cars a day.
It's a 2-lane road.
Yeah, exactly. It's a 2-lane road, and when MDOT started studying this in 2014, this was kind of the impetus for them, using the removal as one of the preferred alternatives, because they said, it's our 30-year rebuild cycle, basically. They rebuild the freeway just as is.
Here, and that's the parking lot in the back, like after you take it back over from the city.
So you have two fronts, essentially?
Yeah, you front the two directions, and you have a prepaid parking lot in the back.
Very cool.
You just gotta make sure the utilities go in the right place.
Right.
My impression is that all of these plans with these boulevards are probably far from the best thing to do. What I would suggest, and this is going to build on what Marcus was saying.
See, the kind of red hashed area would be the excess, basically excess holdings, and this is the existing I-75.
So you're looking, in that previous image, you're cutting through this way, looking that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so that previous image basically is a cross section here, and the next iteration of this alternative, they don't have this parallel service drive running all the way down, but they do have it part of the way. But you know, it's kind of a general sense of what we're looking at, you know. And if you zoom way in, they love to do the pavement markings and everything on here just to, you know, see it in all of its glory, right? So you can actually see just what a overwhelming pedestrian experience you're going to have here at the corner of this road and Gratiot, for example. And really get a sense of what, if this is just built to plan, what scale of development, would be required to really create a public space in here. And it's probably not what we would consider to be kind of a human scale or anything that would really create a seamless transition, from the neighborhoods to the east into downtown. Does that help orient you a little bit?
It helps some. So then we're looking at the entire area that's in this red hash, all the way up from Jefferson, all the way past Gratiot, north of Gratiot, being replaced with some of this proposed, these alternatives that you've shown us a second ago.
Meaning, so the red area, I mean, that is the preferred, quote unquote, preferred alternative, right, that we're looking at. So, I mean, the red area is lands that would be open, basically. They'd be filled in, grassed over, open for development.
So the red is the excess, and the preferred alternative is going essentially in that green space, like the green lines, like north and south.
Cover, so basically, I'm also, like Gary, on the CME board, and I'm involved in an effort to create a design manual for highway removal, or at least highway transformation. And we'll talk about that some more tomorrow. I've been starting to study up on what's going on here. I just sort of started studying up.
Do we have any questions? Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I came a little late to the session. I came a little late. Could you, I feel like we're about to go into a planning exercise. Could you kind of explain why you're collecting these thoughts and who they might be submitted to, or like just the general premise of why we're doing this exercise?
Why we're doing this exercise
Yes, sir.
regarding the I-375 project?
Yeah, given that, like, is anyone from the city of Detroit here, or MDOT?
We have some of the city people coming tomorrow.
Okay.
For the exercise tomorrow is really geared to what you're asking.
Oh, I got you, okay.
Yeah, this is more introductory.
This is an
Session.
introductory. Yeah.
Great, that's all I wanted to know. I'm just curious. Thank
Well,
you.
we'd love to have you. I mean, that's a very good question. You need all the ingredients, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need city council. We were talking to city engineers yesterday at the opening.
Yeah,
And we invited them to participate.
okay, thank
So
you.
We're continuing to look for partners that are diverse, but the community is really a diverse proposition in Oregon.
And there-
Thank you.
It's also, there's a QR code on that iPad stand there, and so this is all going to be open source. So everyone here can participate, and it's more of a community advocacy tool.
Right, I get that. So I guess again, like I think you've answered my question. It's just So when we're participating, the end product, who is this being submitted to? That's what I'm trying to.
Well, we're hopeful that we can get this into a community conversation,
Okay.
including all of those partners that were just identified.
Okay, thank you.
And outreach touches a number of those entities that you mentioned, even if they're not physically in the room. There's a follow-on series following this.
Great.
We think the largest community we're sitting in, Wednesday. We think the young people, you know, we always talk about the youth going to be the future, but we never include them. Whoa. So this is that thing where young people come and make decisions about how their future is going to unfold. In our opinion, it's just us. I'm sure there's others that think politically it resides somewhere else, but I don't think so.
If I can suggest something that, Frank, if, you know, if the basic community participatory design only happens in the official sessions where the city or the state or the DOT, or for that matter, the consultants are there, it sometimes puts it at a disadvantage to people who might not have never met before. You know, in other words, you come together, you might be a homeowner, or you might be a tenant, or you might be a business person, or you might be somebody who owns land, and you have different opinions, and you don't get to hear those opinions until you're out there in front of the decision maker. And sometimes you get a better decision when people actually spend the time to talk among themselves before going into an official channel.
Larry, that's exactly what I was going to say, but much more eloquent. And I overlooked you when I was introducing the senior national this time, and I think that's going to extend for probably another year. So, kind of to speak to Larry's and Jim's comments, you know, here we're kind of in a space where we're not in dot. We don't have necessarily the, you know, legal or de jure authority to do anything, but this entire room, this entire community, we are, in a sense, the experts, not just technical folks that do this, you know, in our professional lives, you know, for various public and private sector agencies, but also just community activists, neighborhood folks that care about their community, care about making their place better. And, you know, as a group to try and brainstorm some starting points, some solutions in, you know, kind of a trusting, mutually supportive environment that really couldn't exist if this were just another public workshop put on by a public agency. We want to kind of take the feedback and the ideas that are generated here this weekend and kind of use those to move the ball forward. I think over the next year or 2 years, however long this process is going to take to play out.
And in close proximity to where I-375 is.
Nailed it. One of the key elements taking place here is a 27-mile circle called the Southwest Greenway and the Joe Louis Greenway, which goes to neighborhoods. We think that's the key. If you think about ingesting dollars and building revenues, if we can get the neighborhoods solved and get them active and engaged, we've done something, because cities aren't built on cities. Cities are built on successful neighborhoods. And most people think it's the other way around. The neighborhoods are existing because it's not true.
Was 7,034 cars. That's it.
Just as an idea of how much traffic's going on there.
Quickly, when you said MDOT proposed 4 options, was freeway removal one of those, or were they given that option from the outside?
That was one of them.
It was. They came up with freeway
Yes.
removal themselves?
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that in North Carolina.
We dig a hole or we fill one. That's design.
That's a testament to how little this road is used, that even the highway department would actually look at this and say, maybe better for us to get it off our books and fill it in.